Chapter 14. The temperature in the room plummeted. "What about my daughter?" Eleanor's voice was deathly serious. Jack winced at the snarl he imagined in his mother's voice, careful not to show any other reaction to the question. Not that it really mattered, since no one was looking at him. "There is something different about her as well, isn't there? I know I saw her hair changing colors during the short time she was sitting next to me. How strong are her powers?" Chantal did a commendable job of remaining calm in the face of Eleanor's rising anger. "Why would I tell you anything more about my family than I already have?" A viable chill filled the room as she spoke. "We are cooperating with the binding of Kaitlyn and Jack out of mutual necessity. Make no mistake, I still despise you and don't trust you in the slightest." Jack held his breath, not daring to move, as he witnessed a side of his mother that he hadn't known existed before that moment. She was scaring him, and he could feel the magical charge in the air as her control slipped. Jason jumped from his chair and hurried to his wife's side, the temperature in the room continuing to plummet as she glared at Chantal. "How are you doing that? Growing up, your main element was fire, not ice. How?" "No, forget that for the moment. When did you become an ice witch?" John held his wife firmly in place as she paled and questioned the furious Baron. Jason glared at her as he knelt in front of Eleanor and held her hands in his, whispering softly into her ears. The water on the table had frozen, and the breath of each person in the room misted out in a fog as they shivered from the cold. Eleanor took in a shuddering breath, looking deep into her husband's eyes, using him as an anchor while she regained control. The chill in the air disappeared, and the water and juice on the table hissed as they returned to liquid form. She smiled sadly and looked away from her husband to her scared son and then to their guests. "This is also, at least in part, because of you and what I had to go through to survive." "Are you all right, Mom?" Jack whispered, struggling to meet his mother's gaze. He had never been scared of her before, and now he was. He had been afforded a glimpse of the depth of her powers. Powers that overshadowed and smothered the piddling displays that he had seen with Kaitlyn. Nodding her head, she took a moment to respond, the subtle strain of whatever she had done receding from her youthful face. "Better now." Pulling out a chair from the table, Jason set it down next to her and sat as close as he could, all the while keeping a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. Chantal was looking at the glass of water on the table in front of her, her bloodless face studying the newly returned liquid. "What happened to you back then?" she asked in a barely audible voice. Eleanor slid Jason's hand from her shoulder to her hand, pushing her chair back from the table in the same move. "Maybe someday I'll tell you." Leaving all the plates and food on the table, she led her husband to the living room, motioning for Jack to follow along. The three of them were sitting on the long family couch when Chantal and John walked in. The large man's face was tight and shuddered with concealed emotion as they settled onto the loveseat across from them. "I haven't spoken to my parents since college," Chantal opened with. "It's true," John confirmed. "After you left that last time and she learned what they had done. Chantal had a blowout with her parents about their actions and what they had done to you. They went too far and she acknowledges that, but she also had no part in what they did." Jack was sincerely wishing he had not returned to the house. There was too much to this conversation. He didn't know anything about his mother's college life, or whatever friendship she had once shared with Kaitlyn's parents, which left him confused and struggling to understand everything that was happening. "Is that supposed to help?" his mother asked in a marginally warmer voice. "Her parents may have been the cause and driving force behind everything that happened, but she is still responsible for her own actions." "I'm not saying she isn't, I was just trying to say that she has changed, regardless of what you may want to believe. She certainly didn't act like it the other night, or any time we've seen each other since then," she said waspishly. Chantal looked up, meeting her eyes. "I was shocked to see you, and just reacted. I never meant to reignite the old issues we've had with each other. If anything, I would rather we became friends again, like when we were younger. That is especially true if the kids are going to bond together." She seemed sincere, and Jack wanted to believe her. There were a few red flags about the woman that he couldn't just forget, namely the way she seemed to enjoy hurting him while also healing him. Of course, that could just be a simple quirk of hers, and not a larger part of her personality. Eleanor sighed and nudged her son. "She has always been a little sadistic." She whispered for his ears alone. He had no idea how she had known what he was thinking at that moment. I'm willing to at least try getting along with you, but know this, Chantel. You only get one chance, and you are only getting that because of John, Kaitlyn, and our friendship as children. If you waste this chance and betray me or my family, I will take you directly to the council and make sure your well is ripped to shreds along with all your mana channels. Chantel swallowed, the last of the blood in her face fleeing. I understand. John shook his head but smiled. Thanks for that. Good. Now that we've decided, we won't kill each other for the moment. Honey, why don't you take John out back and get to know him better? Jack, sorry, but can you wait out front for the girls to return? Eleanor asked them, the tension leaving her body. Sure, I'm all right with that. He leaped from the couch, making a break for the front door. He was more than happy to get away from them. The last thing he heard before opening and hurrying through the door were the words, let's just say that Penny is special in a different, but no less troublesome way than Jack, and leave it at that for now. He shut the front door and sat on the grass in front of the house, thinking. After that rather scary argument, in the end, she had still told them about his sister. Gazing up at the evening sky, streaks of orange appearing overhead, his mind drifted to thoughts of Kaitlyn. After experiencing the strength of his mother's magic, he now had a firmer idea of the younger girl's strength. It was apparent from Chantel's reaction that his mother was strong, even knowing that it brought the sheer difference in their strength clearly into view. The new information giving him an idea of the gap that must have existed between the young woman and her school friends. It was something that would have become increasingly obvious as time went on, making it all the more impressive that she had been able to fool them for as long as she had. A blonde-haired young woman with electric blue eyes and tall boots appeared above his head, looking down at him. A muffled giggle came from the road. I can almost see up your skirt, he grinned, meeting her eyes. Pervert. His little sister called from her place on the driveway. I thought you were going out to eat and get away from here. We did. She held up a white fast food bag. I thought you were going inside. Our moms are busy trying to kill each other while our dads are out back, becoming friends. She demurely swept her skirt into place as she sat down on the grass next to him. Reaching into the bag, she handed him a small burger and waved Penelope over, the open grass providing plenty of places for her to sit without being too close. So, what did my mom say to start the fight this time? She asked while unwrapping her own burger. Penelope snorted and began to cough as some ketchup went down the wrong tube. Jack felt a moment of regret as Kaitlyn began to thump on her back, helping to dislodge it. He didn't like not being able to help his own sister. She wanted to know about Penelope, he told them once she had stopped coughing. Penny winced and spoke with a rough voice. Yeah, that would do it. Mom has gotten just a tad more protective since this all started. She coughed again and bit into her hamburger. Yeah, she has. He said somewhat helplessly, realizing how mature and grown up his sister was being about all the changes. The only time she had broken down was when their father had learned the truth. Since then, she hadn't complained once. Kaitlyn leaned back and laid down on the grass, in a position reminiscent of how they had found Jack upon their return. What did your mother say? She got scary. He hesitated before continuing. The air grew colder, the water on the table froze, and your mom freaked out. She said something about how our mom's main element used to be fire, or something. What exactly does that mean? We haven't gone over elements, main or otherwise, yet. No, we haven't. It didn't even occur to me that it was a topic we needed to discuss. My main element is lightning, while my mother's is light, which is traditionally used for healing. My father is an ice mage. She stopped speaking and pulled out a limp fry from the greasy bag. Don't start thinking that main elements mean anything great. It is just the gauge for what people can use the easiest and with the least amount of magic and effort. Most magic users can use any element. It will just cost far more, depending on their affinity with it. They continued talking about how magic worked, Penelope chiming in on occasion as the light slowly faded from the sky and they were forced back inside the quiet house. The table had been cleared, and their parents were sitting around it staring at each other in an awkward silence. It's getting dark, Jack informed them, stepping away from his sister and closer to Kaitlyn. Chantel sighed and pushed away from the table. That's fine. We were done talking anyway. With your help, I'll work on healing my daughter and then we can leave. She will need to do the rest on her own. Strengthening the connection to her well so this doesn't happen again is paramount." Kaitlyn nodded along gloomily. This was something her mother had been saying constantly since the night before. Jack walked back into the living room and waited by the couch, while his sister disappeared further inside the house. His mother appeared in the doorway, a moment later with the Lockachar family behind her. She is going to do this quickly, so they can go home before it gets too dark. However, doing the healing so quickly and roughly means it's going to hurt, she informed him as Chantel reached for his wrist. "Chantel and I will be going out later tonight to hunt and possibly eliminate whatever we can find." Seeing his puzzled look, she continued, "Depending on how much of her energy she has to use in healing Kaitlyn, she may need to do this a second time to finish the healing process. It would be better for you if she was able to finish the process in one go." Stealing his nerves, Jack nodded and braced for the same fiery pain he had experienced before. Kaitlyn settled onto the couch next to him and reached for his free hand while offering the other to her mother. "This is going to hurt," Chantel whispered to them, her eyes flicking nervously to her child. "And I'm not going to enjoy it as much as I normally would, especially since one of the people feeling the pain is my daughter. Just know that all healing hurts when done rapidly. It only feels good when it is done slowly." "What about me? I'm not being healed." Jack was curious. It had never really hurt when he was working with Kaitlyn or his mother. "I'm not bonded to you, and I'm not cycling the power through me and back to you. I am going to be actively taking it from your well to power the healing. With time, you will learn to relax and maybe even control the flow of energy. Until that time, it is going to hurt. Of course, it will hurt much less, I am told, once you have fully bonded with someone. Of course, at that point, they are the only one who can use your power and the process will no longer be forced. Now hush, I need to concentrate on this. Healing the channels in a person's body is much more difficult and energy-intensive than working with flesh and bone." He understood what she was trying to say. With the bond, he was giving the energy he generated to the person. Otherwise, it was being taken against his will. He and Kaitlyn already had the beginnings of a bond, not to mention, he could already somewhat sense and kind of control the magic in his body. Maybe he could direct it to Chantel this time, and reduce the pain her just taking it would have inflicted. It didn't work. Whether it was because it wasn't possible, or he simply didn't know what he was doing, any attempts to direct the energy failed. Likely it was a mixture of both and more. He had only been practicing for a few days, after all. Not to mention the first time he had shown any kind of control was the night before. There was no real chance for him to pull off a miracle this time, and the pain now coursing through his body ensured that wasn't going to change. The hand holding Kaitlyn began to glow with an inner light, as he felt that now familiar shift as the magic within his well was pulled from his body. She pulled heavily, forcing him to his limits in order to heal her daughter as quickly as possible. He clenched his teeth and tried his hardest to not scream, even as blood dripped from the edges of his lips. There was no reason to scare Penny and draw her from her room. Next to him, Kaitlyn began to whimper, her eyes shining with a color not her own. The normal electric blue glow replaced with a white light that matched the glow emanating from her mother's hand. The light began to spread from her eyes to the rest of her body, highlighting the channels her magic flowed through. The spirit-based channels had no physical form, but at that moment, everyone would have sworn they did. The ragged edges of the channels were plain to see to the naked eye, the light gathering around the weakened and frayed spots. At each location, the light grew in strength and pulsed as the healing began. Kaitlyn's hand gripped his tightly, their eyes meeting in shared agony. Dimly, he was aware of the light in her channels, evening out and becoming uniform as they healed. The line of blood dribbling from the corners of his mouth, increasing in size as ever more energy was forcefully pulled from his body. It was a small blessing that he didn't have to look into the cruel and malicious eyes of Kaitlyn's mother this time. Instead, he was able to stare into the eyes of the young woman, who was quickly coming to mean more than she should to him. More than the short amount of time they had known each other allowed. He was fighting a losing battle against those feelings. He was afraid of how strong they were, and even more afraid that she might not feel the same. He knew she at least liked him as a friend, but not if her feelings went any deeper. Realistically, they shouldn't. It hadn't even been a full week since they first met. It was too soon for anything more than a friendship level of feelings to develop. Yet, that is exactly what had happened to him. Kaitlyn's back arched as her body spasmed and lifted her off the cushion, her neck pressed firmly against the upper edge of the couch. Jack held tight to her hand, doing his best to keep her eyes on him even as the light behind them grew brighter. "Almost there," Chantel muttered, sweat dripped from the tip of her nose and splashed on her arm below. The light spread around her body and slowly converged on her eyes as the channels healed. The ragged and frayed edges were no more. Inhaling sharply, mother and daughter released him at the same time. The color of Kaitlyn's eyes changed back to her normal blue, glowing brightly from all the pent-up energy she had unwittingly absorbed while holding his hand. Jack jumped off the couch as she collapsed and started to spark everywhere. It had felt so natural for them to reach for each other just then. He hadn't even considered the possible consequences. The sparks from her fingers coalesced into an orb of plasma as she began to concentrate. John helped his wife to stand as they shared wide-eyed looks with Eleanor and her husband. "I can't hold this for much longer," Kaitlyn ground out, barely holding it together. The rapid and intensive healing her mother had just done on her had ground her mind down to the metaphorical bone. She had never felt so tired before in her life. Not to mention what holding all the energy was doing to her well. The connection to the source of her power was damaged, and maintaining a connection to Jack's power had helped solidify and marginally strengthen it. Now it was too much, and she had begun to lose control. "Pour everything you have into the orb," Eleanor commanded. She stepped forward as the ball of plasma burned white-hot and grew in size. "That's all," Kaitlyn panted, not knowing why she had been ordered to create something she couldn't control. "We're going to carry you outside. As soon as you clear the door, toss it as high into the sky as you can." Eleanor waved the men forward to pick her up. Jack hurried over to the front door, opening it just in time for the group to burst past him. Without a second to spare, she tossed the glowing sphere high into the sky, using the last of her energy to get it as high as possible. High above them, it exploded out in the dusk sky, sending tendrils of electricity snaking across the sky. The clap of thunder followed within a heartbeat, and then the lights all across town went out. Eleanor sighed, her head tilting back as she looked upward. "Well, shish,"